I'm Alan Lyles, and I'll be your moderator for the webinar that we're having today, which is um, the impact and necessity of philanthropy in higher education, investing in knowledge, equity, and long-term public value. That's a mouthful, but it's so critical at this time in higher education when there's so many forces in education in general, but particularly higher education, that are occurring at the same time and posing challenges. We thought this would be among the most important that we could address. Our webinar is being recorded. Afterwards, everyone who has registered will receive a link to the registration. If you have questions, you'll see at the bottom of your webinar registration page, when you've logged in, that there is a Q&A feature. Enter your question there, and then when we get to the Q&A toward the end of the webinar, we'll answer those questions. If your question is not answered while we're live, we will do so after the event and share that with our attendees. Having said that, I'd like to turn it over to the president of our university and former mayor of our city, Kurt Schmoke, for a welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Alan. I appreciate it. And welcome to the University of Baltimore's webinar on the impact and necessity of philanthropy in higher education, investing in knowledge, equity, and long-term public value. Many of you know the University of Baltimore just celebrated our first century and are positioning ourselves for the next. As funding landscapes shift, philanthropy plays an expanding role in stabilizing and shaping colleges and universities. Higher education's capacity to generate long-term returns in civic, economic, and research domains make it a powerful site for sustained social investment. Our dialogue examines how philanthropic partnerships can strengthen institutional resilience while advancing democratic vitality and the public good. This session will be a moderated roundtable with opportunities for audience engagement at the end. There are challenging times for higher education, and insights from our speakers will assist all of us in successfully navigating these disruptions. So now let me turn it back to Professor Alan Lyles. And thank you, Alan, for this your last webinar as a professor at the University of Baltimore. You've done outstanding work for us in the community, and we truly appreciate it.
Thank you. When I left Hopkins to come to the University of Baltimore, and aside to Kurt and the rest of you, it was because of the mission at the University of Baltimore and the population of working adults who were coming there and then improving their lives, the lives of their community, and ultimately, I think, is an important role in our nation. And I've never regretted that decision after 26 years. I feel fortunate. So now back to the webinar. We have three speakers who each have expertise in philanthropy. They have slightly different perspectives. So in the interactions, we would expect to see a collective enrichment of what the conversation is about philanthropy and how it could or should be working today for higher education. First, Bob Parsons, I'd like to give you a brief bio for each of our speakers. When you go to the webinar site, you'll have a more complete bio on each. He is an entrepreneur and philanthropist. He's the founder of GoDaddy and PXG, Extreme Golf, Parsons Extreme Golf. He's a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author, Fire in the Hole, the story of his traumatic, hilarious life and explosive success. And that is not overstatement. I am most of the way through the book, and it is inspiring. He's the CEO and founder of YAM Worldwide, a family of companies spanning golf, motorcycles, real estate, finance, marketing, innovation, and philanthropy, among others. However, Bob was born to a lower middle-class blue-collar family in East Baltimore. Not an early bloomer, he failed fifth grade and would have failed his senior year in high school had he not enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1968. Mr. Parsons is a U.S. Marine Corps Vietnam War veteran who served as an 0311 rifleman. He received the Purple Heart, Combat Action Ribbon, and Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry. He put himself through college at the University of Baltimore on the GI Bill, graduating magna cum laude. He also says in the book that the way he became an accountant is he had to choose a major, and when they gave him a list, the first one was accounting. So he said, okay, I'll choose that. And that's how that came to be. He later received both an honorary doctorate and the Distinguished Entrepreneur Award from his alma mater. In 2012, Mr. Parsons and his wife, Renee, founded the Bob and Renee Parsons Foundation to provide transformational grants for marginalized populations and support underfunded causes in homelessness, medical care, youth education, and the needs of injured military veterans and military families. In that last part, particularly, he has received recognition in 2019 as a Marine for Life, and in 2026, Semper Fi Award by the U.S. Marine Corps University Foundation for his longtime dedication to the U.S. Marine Corps, philanthropy, and service. I've listened to several of Mr. Parsons' talks, and he says this, I think, in almost each one. The Marine Corps deserves credit for everything he's ever accomplished. So sometimes it takes higher education, but more than higher education. Dr. Shanesha Sauls is president and CEO of the Baltimore Community Foundation. In her role, she leads the strategic direction of BCF, driving growth and impact for the betterment of the Baltimore region through grant making, advocacy, and partnerships. She has been recognized by the Maryland Daily Record as one of Maryland's most admired CEOs and an influential Marylander. In 2023, the Baltimore Business Journal named her a Power 10 CEO. She served on several boards locally and nationally, including the former chair of the Baltimore City Board of School Commissioners, a trustee of Healthy Neighborhoods, and as board chair of Mission Investors Exchange. If you have not, you might want to consider listening to Dr. Sauls, Shanesha's TEDx talk, Baltimore, about education, and it's inspiring in its observation that a high school diploma is the gateway certificate to being part of society these days. And finally, Ramon Jackson. Mr. Jackson is head of community affairs and president T. Rowe Price Foundation. He champions and guides the firm's community investments, inclusion, corporate communications, and sustainability strategies that advance firm priorities, associate engagement, and business outcomes. He's been with T. Rowe Price since 2020, beginning in human resources. Since joining the firm, he has spearheaded the strategic alignment of the firm's inclusion strategies, corporate responsibility, philanthropy, and corporate communication. Prior to this, he was employed by Morgan Stanley as the National Diversity Officer. Before that, he was 20-year career in Northwestern Mutual, where he held leadership roles in technology, corporate strategy, field distribution, and human resources. Ramon has been recognized for his passion, leadership, and commitment to global impact by receiving the Patriot Award from the Department of Defense and a Milwaukee Times Black Excellence Award nominee. He is a Baltimore Business Journal recognized leader and was also recognized as a Black Enterprise Magazine's top Black executive in corporate diversity. Now, as Bob Parsons is a UB alum, I'd like to direct my kickoff question to him. And Bob, what would you say are your foundation's top priorities in higher education today, and have they changed in the last few years?
First of all, I'm going to answer a question before it even gets asked, and that is, I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, I'm an independent. All right, so I'm on both sides of the aisle. The second thing is what's important to me and to my wife Renee is that our schools, when we do support a school, they have real world leadership. And you don't get more real world than being the mayor of the city of Baltimore. And that's what we benefit from at the University of Baltimore. So that's good. And then as far as what we look to help on the university level is not really the university. What we look to do is we look to help the student. We're more preoccupied with the student than we ever would be. This is the university. And I know, it could be, to help the child, you got to help the parent, but we're at a more granular level. Um, so that's that, and we've always been doing that, and what we've done and how we've changed is mostly due to the opportunities or requests that come across our desks, and then we look to do that on a case by case basis as opposed to across the board. We are a small foundation. We move 1 million to charity every other week, and that's pretty much who we are, and I guess who we'll continue to be. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. So if we were sitting and talking as a group, who has something that they would like to add to that or say for your foundation? Shanesa? Sha?
Absolutely. First, it's an honor to meet you, Mr. Parsons, and to hear your story. So I'm the daughter of a veteran, and I want to thank you for your service. It's incredibly important, and I think it's important to note, as Dr. Lyles noted, that it is a pathway to careers, and I hope as a society we continue to recognize that military service is not only an important one but also an honorable one. So thank you for the opportunity to raise that, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I am at the Community Foundation, as was shared in my bio, and we happen to be a neighbor of UB. We moved to the neighborhood 2 weeks before COVID. So it's a pleasure to join you all on Mount Royal, where our headquarters are. So the Community Foundation in Baltimore has been in existence for north of 50 years. And we were founded by the captains of industry when Baltimore, once upon a time, we're blessed to still have our T. Rowe Price headquartered here, but Baltimore was a finance capital of the country, and the large major banks got together and decided that it was time to form a permanent endowment for the good of the community. And so they got together and they formed what eventually became named as the Baltimore Community Foundation. And we serve two primary goals. First, we are a permanent endowment for the good of Baltimore. So there's a portion of our funds every year that we direct based on the discernment of our staff and the guidance of my board of trustees. Mayor Schmoke, President Schmoke, is a member of our board of trustees, and we are always happy to have his wisdom and his insights to direct grants for the good of the community. So I'll talk about that focus in a second. And then the second part of what we do beyond shepherding a permanent endowment for Baltimore is that we support individuals, families, and typically small to mid-sized businesses in their charitable goals through donor advised funds, but for our purposes, we can consider them charitable accounts. And essentially with the belief that they build their success and their wealth here in Baltimore, and they want to make sure that that wealth and success stays in Baltimore, and we help to shepherd that giving. So in terms of the latter part of the house, I have a team that just kind of helps those individuals and families clarify opportunities, shepherd the dollars, and make sure that the fiduciary responsibilities are fulfilled for those individual nonprofits, including colleges and universities that they want to contribute to. And I'll say, this will be back of the envelope, but I would say a large proportion of our education affinity dollars go to institutions of higher learning in Baltimore, as do a portion of our what we call education opportunity. That is like scholarships for people who may not have the resources to go to school, are also supported through our charitable funds. On the discretionary side, we give out maybe about $4 million a year, between $3 and $4 million a year. That is determined through a strategy directed by our board. And they've been traditionally done in two broad areas. We serve Baltimore City and Baltimore County. So we have a number of funds directed towards education. And historically, that's been everything from supporting after school programs to teacher and school leadership pipelines to more recently coming out of COVID. We recognize after many public school students in Baltimore were out of school for 2 years, that we needed to reestablish their mental health, to support youth mental health, and also to provide grants to ensure that schools were welcoming environments for people to learn. So we have devoted our resources in that regard in education over the last few years, as well as in early childhood. So we think a lot about what it takes to start at the finish line. And for those brain scientists on the call, you'll know that there are kind of 3 times in life where your brain is the most elastic. And among those is 0 to 5. And we believe that no matter where you live, no matter your zip code, no matter your neighborhood, no matter your family situation, that with the right experiences and involving the families of those involved, that students, no matter where they are, can be ready for kindergarten. And so we support that strategy. And it has worked. So for a number of years, we have had evidence to show that students in Baltimore City are as ready when they receive certain experiences as their counterparts in Montgomery County and Howard County. So that's been on the education side. And then on the neighborhood side, we're basic, cleaner, greener, safer, and more vibrant. We believe that neighborhoods are how people experience their sense of place, their quality of life, how they see their city, how they see their county. So we support neighborhood resident-led projects, anything from street cleanups and tree plantings to festivals to taking a vacant lot and making it a green space, urban farms, and everything in between. And that is a way for us to put the trajectory of the communities in our neighbors and our residents' hands. I mean, we try to be a partner in the work and that those resident-led activities. Ironically, and it actually happens to be a coincidence, but the timing is perfect. I always say it really is sometimes better to be lucky than to be smart. We are in the process of undergoing a massive strategic planning process, which was planned anyway, but it just happens to be that this moment it becomes more relevant for at least 2 reasons. One, as a city, as a region, as a society, we are grappling with significant changes in the landscape, and the strategic planning process will allow us to grapple with that. And 2, we have thankfully experienced a time of tremendous growth, and now we need to figure out what that growth means. So it could be that a year from now, I'll be having a very different conversation about what we're going to focus on, because I actually don't know, which has actually been incredibly exciting. So hopefully I answered your question, and thank you for the opportunity. And I'm also thrilled to be joined by my friend and counterpart and peer in the work, Mr. Ramon Jackson. So.
Thank you. Shanesha, I think that what you have laid out is multifaceted, but it also complements what Bob has identified. Because if we look at higher education in general, too many times I think, and I've had this personal experience, PS 23, Baltimore City Public Schools, 1950s, that those are gate shutting rather than gate opening kind of experiences. So I'm delighted to hear some of the foci that you have for your foundation. Ramon?
Yeah, happy to bring us home on this question, and you will likely see some consistency across the messages, but I do want to offer my gratitude for creating space for this really important conversation with absolute leaders in the industry, Dr. Sauls and Mr. Parsons. It's great to see you all. For T. Rowe Price Foundation, we're actually celebrating our 45th year this year as a foundation, so it's a milestone moment for us as we think about the impact that we can have across the country, but primarily here in Baltimore, which is certainly our headquarters. So we've actually been in the middle of a strategic realignment for the last probably 2 years or so, with 2 main focus areas. One is on financial well-being, which likely is not a surprise to the folks that are watching today, given that is what we do as a business. But we understand that not everyone has access to financial education tools and resources, and some of the conversations that drive long-term financial planning and financial security. So everything from young people at the littlest age thinking about their relationship with money to the families and on through retirement. So that's kind of a large part of how we think about our funding mechanism moving forward. And second, similar to Shanesha and what she shared, is kind of thriving communities. And what are those levers that we think makes Baltimore and the surrounding community even stronger? And for us, it's 3 things right now. We're looking at arts and culture. We understand, via our research and kind of our employees, that when you've got really strong anchor institutions and artists and creative spaces, those lift landscapes. So being able to invest in those areas that drive creativity, innovation, hopefully home ownership and retention, we know those are meaningful parts of our strategy. And then kind of anchored inside of there is going to also be youth empowerment, which I think lines up with our discussion today, understanding that you can't get to higher ed unless you actually graduate in that 12th grade. So making sure that we're doing those things so that early learning and getting through 0 to 5 to Shanesha's point and on through graduation sets people up for higher learning if that is their chosen path. And then third, I would say is for us is our innovation and vitality. We understand there are some really creative nonprofits and organizations around the country and also in Baltimore that may not line up nicely against food insecurity and housing insecurity. Those are all great causes, but there's some really great innovative things that really work across the dimensions that we think lift the entire ecosystem. So it's important for us to make sure that we're uncovering those new ways of lifting Baltimore as a collective. So that's kind of how we think about kind of our giving strategy right now and kind of what's shifted around us that kind of pushed us in this direction and others. And it's a couple of things. And Shanesha hit it kind of on the head a little bit with just the shift in the funding landscape. We have been seeing kind of a pullback for a number of reasons that impact nonprofit organizations, which really pushed us to say we need to be thinking about the average size of our grants. And to do larger grants means we have to have fewer grantees. So really taking an inside-outside look at our partners and where do we think we can partner after deep listening to have more meaningful impact. So we're actively in that space of realignment in response to what's happening kind of in the broader ecosystem.
Bob, if I could, there's a question about your embrace of military veterans as a particular focus. The question reads, "Hi, Bob, such a short period of your life was spent in the military, but you spent a considerable piece of your fortune improving the life of veteran students at the University of Baltimore. What is it about your connection to the military that has gravitated toward the veteran community?"
Well, a couple things. First of all, I was for the first part of my active duty, other than boot training and so forth, I was a combat Marine, and I was with the 26th Marines in Guangdong Province, and we were in combat most nights, and I did that a month before I was wounded. And to answer that question, try doing that for a month and tell me how short it feels. The second thing is after that I was in the hospital. I got wounded. I was in the hospital, and I got through all that, and then I was made a courier of classified documents, and I wasn't in a bush anymore, but I was I was all over the place, all over Vietnam, rocket attacks, and that sort of thing. Want to see how fast you can run? Listen to the sirens that rockets are coming in, and listen to the rockets that you break any land speed records there are. So anyhow, that experience impacted me like nothing in my life. When I came back, I had both a big case of PTSD, and I was a different person altogether. Whereas I was a hellacious student to begin with for undergrad meaning less than college, and then I went to school and I was was a stellar student. I graduated magna cum laude, took the CPA exam, passed it the first time, taught myself how to program a computer out of a book and so forth. I wouldn't have done any of that without the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps, I owe them credit for anything I've ever accomplished. And so that being the case, as far as what we have, I have it because of the Marine Corps and our military services. And so I do whatever I can to help my brothers and sisters that are in those services as well. So that's why.
Thank you, Bob. An observation I have is I've worked in or been in about 30 countries, and healthcare is most of my focus, access to medicines, but also education. And there are philanthropic initiatives in other nations, but I think that it's something that distinguishes the US, and it could be because we're such a market-based kind of world when it comes to social services, healthcare, and things like that. So what I'm hoping that our audience is hearing, and it comes through strongly, is the you're talking about values, and it seems like the values are all consistent here in terms of transformative experience, and that leads you to what you're doing with philanthropy. Before I go into another question for the group, if you want to, please encourage you build off of what someone else has said or respond to or add to it as if we were sitting together. So I'll pause a moment. If I'm in a classroom, I say I'm counting to 7 silently now, meaning I'll wait.
So I think this idea of the importance of our institutions here in Baltimore and how we protect them and the opportunities they unlock is something that has been raised in a couple of different ways. I guess he's a mentor of mine who now is a donor of mine. So he's a mentor in a former life. He happens to now be a donor in my current life. And I remember he said to me something like 15 years ago, we were talking about his life. He's a Baltimorean through and through, went to Baltimore City Public Schools, graduated from City College, and attended UB and Loyola. And he said, I had this, and he ended up with a fantastic life in finance. Ramon, I'm not making this up. Like this has all kind of come full circle. And he said, I was able to build this wonderful life, get educated here in Baltimore, and I never had to leave the city. And while he was telling me this in a different context, and I actually don't remember exactly why he brought up the fact that he had this wonderful life and he never had to leave Baltimore City to do it. I think that's a part of our responsibility and our obligation in making Baltimore a stronger place and a better place. So a place that raises its own talent, attracts new talent, produces new knowledge. And so I think that's kind of a through line that kind of reminds me, it just reminds me of that story.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, slightly changing gears, and Dr. Sauls, you'll take the lead on responding to this or just discussing it. Universities are facing financial pressure, enrollment shifts, even questions about value. In that context, where can philanthropy make the greatest difference? And again, please feel free to build on each other's perspectives here.
Right. So I'm actually going to draw on a personal experience it's not gonna start well. Mayor Schmoke knows me well, but I'll try to make it rosy. I'll try to get to the rainbow. So in a former life, I designed market strategy for colleges and universities. And what we saw 10, 15 years ago was that there was going to be some demographic changes coming down the pike that universities of all types, all of my clients were actually private institutions outside of Baltimore. So the profile of the kind of student who was going to come to who would come to college and universities were going to be different than we'd seen ever before in every way, in terms of socioeconomic profile as well as racial profile and experiences, and also the number of students who were going to be available, right? Like essentially like the size of the pie of people who would come to college and university was going to become smaller. So we were seeing we're already kind of predicting significant demographic changes. Where they were coming from was also going to be different geographically, right? So like if we look at the map of the United States, what we saw is that something, if I remember correctly, the southwest portion of the United States is where you're going to have the largest demographic growth, where traditionally most private institutions were able to get their students from the Northeast. That's where you had the smallest growth, closer to zero than not. And so what it did, it presented an opportunity for institutions of all types, large, small, public and private, to figure out what is your value proposition in this new world. So as you try to position your value in 5 to 10 years, who you're competing for looks different. Their access to the resources to afford a higher education looks different. And what they demand and what they expect from the experience looks different. And what we used to say is that those institutions that can translate how they learn, whether it's liberal arts or not, to what happens to that student 3, 4, and then 15, 20 years after they leave college are going to be the ones that are in the best position to be successful. So how that, I think, connects to your question is I think philanthropy has always positioned itself, whether it's individual philanthropy, private foundations, or corporate philanthropy to support colleges and universities. But I think increasingly we are looking for how universities serve as an opportunity for us to build new talent pipelines, create new knowledge, and also to position people in order to be successful. And so what I would say is that while I think the philanthropic dollars will step up to the extent that they can, certainly we can't fill all the gaps. I think what we're going to be looking at is how are you positioning your value proposition to make sure that the people who experience the college experience as well as the philanthropic dollars that you're receiving translates into the correct ROI. So I tried to end on a rosy spot. I might not have done it very well. Ramon will save me because he's much better at this part than I am. But I do think it's important to understand the context in which higher education is done.
Yeah. You're spot on, Shanaisha, in terms of the context and the reality of kind of the impact and what it means for philanthropy. And I would say, I would echo your comment and say there's probably three areas, at least for me, that I come to mind around where I think philanthropy really can play and has played, I think, a meaningful role on the higher ed side of the house. And the first one Shanaisha hit on was around just access and affordability. I know I am a beneficiary of an academic scholarship, and had I not had that, I probably would have had different options in terms of where I went and how hard it would have been to make it through undergraduate school. So I think the role that philanthropy has played is being helpful to kind of augment scholarships, emergency assistance, wraparound support, improving enrollment, and ideally driving completion as well, because I have people that have left just before graduation because of funding or not having that final semester of funding in place. So I think those are areas where I think we've traditionally done a really good job. I think where we're starting to see more movement on the philanthropy side is really leaning into those student success infrastructure elements. So around providing support around advising, mental health services, career placement, the things that Shanaisha was saying around, like once you're here, kind of what's that pipeline kind of into whatever happens after graduation. I think the last thing I would say is more around, I think it lines up with this notion that a lot of creativity and innovation happens kind of on campuses. So the role that we can have in helping drive that catalytic capital for transformation, which ultimately is just enabling institutions like yours to pilot and scale initiatives that will help the broader ecosystem. I think those are ways that we can fund testing and learning kind of on college campuses.
I agree with the first two speakers, Dr. Sullivan, Dr. Jackson, that you first of all, it all starts with the student. It's like they got this it's a saying that you help the mother, you help the child. Well, it's almost the opposite of that. You help the child, you help them, you help the mother, big time because. Well, that's what drives the whole program. One of the things that we do is we focus a lot, at least with the University of Baltimore, on Pell Grants. Student gets a Pell Grant, we'll cover the rest for the student, and so that's just another way of looking at it, another way of approaching it. And then the other thing about that is if a student gets a Pell Grant, they're from a different socioeconomic group. And that's exactly who we want to help. So is it limited to them, just them? No, but it starts with them for us.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that example, Mr. Parsons, around just kind of how you show up in connection with other services like the Pell Grant. I know for us, one of the things that we've been doing the last couple of years, albeit with a different institution, is funding access for students and teachers to access Barron's as a financial tool and resource so that every student on that campus gets access to the Barron's investment platform, the articles and the research, and the teachers get access to that same thing as well as the lesson plans. So again, we know that can be expensive in some cases for students and or professors and teachers, but to take that off the table in terms of don't worry about cost of that, let's fund that. So whether you're in the School of Business or one of the other schools on campus, you're able to have a working knowledge of what's happening in the markets in your own portfolio as well.
Something I would like to add to that is that people who are not currently involved with or knowledgeable about higher education tend to think of it as all of one thing, but it isn't, as you all know. There are research-intensive places such as Johns Hopkins and Harvard and places like that, and there are comprehensive universities such as the University of Baltimore. My younger daughter went here for undergraduate and a master's in public administration. set her in a career for life, the direction that she ultimately went in. So when we say the word student, I think sometimes if we're talking to people generally, we have to be quite clear, because this isn't the 19-year-old or 18-year-old that's wearing a freshman beanie. These are working adults, probably in their mid-20s to early 40s, and who have real responsibilities in addition to school. And those responsibilities can be being a single parent, juggling more than one job. It can be having more mental health issues, particularly since the pandemic, but we've seen the referrals for requests for accommodation and case management support continue to increase because of the stresses of this. So being there to meet the student at the level of their need, which is what all of you were talking about, I think has become even more critical.
One other thing I'll second, and this goes, I'm sure Dr. Souls will agree with this, is that with education is one thing, application of the education is another thing. And as the student progresses throughout their life, post-education, and how successful they happen to be, will determine largely the likelihood that they will return the favor to the school. And I'll give you an example. I was just a Lance Corporal. I grew up poor as a church rat, but the Marine Corps changed my life. And so far, I've given to their causes over $123 million. And I mean, I'm not done yet. And the reason is I feel as though I owe them, and everything I've ever done is because of what they did. Now, the University of Baltimore is right in that line. They've also made a huge difference in my life, and I love their slogan, "Knowledge that works," because it sure works for me. All right, so there you go.
If I could put a footnote on that, Bob, I would like to add knowledge that works for people who work, but that's not our tagline. So, Ramon, from your experience, what strategies or types of philanthropic investments have had the greatest impact on higher education, whether in terms of student outcomes, institutional resilience, broader community benefits? You choose the outcomes that you think are among the most important. And could you share examples?
Yeah, it's always hard to pick one when you think about things that are working, and all the things that are working are not a T. Rowe Price thing. I love hearing the ideas that Shanae is doing and Bob and others because no one owns kind of all the best solutions, but I know it's incredibly important. When I think about the levers and the areas that tend to work really well, I think it's that notion of where we can close the access gap. So we've for many years long talked about the importance of endowed and targeted scholarships. I mean, that doesn't go away, especially as the cost of higher education continues to move at a pace different than the cost of living. So I think the more that we can lean into those spaces, and we've seen countless examples of people that have given generously to institutions, even in the last 4 years, to really strengthen those endowments. I think the importance of public-private partnerships, so where universities and nonprofits and foundations come together. We've done something similar on the T. Rowe Price side, on the fiscal sponsor side, to be able to stand up the university as an anchor to really be a resource to support nonprofits, broadly speaking. We're doing something similar with Coppin State around really strengthening the nonprofit ecosystem and some research in that way as well. And I think the last piece I'll add, and I would love to hear from Shanae and Bob as well, is kind of that flexible, unrestricted, innovation-focused funding. I know we love in our world to do some restricted funding to focus on this one thing. I think there is a time and a place where that is really important because there is a focus area. But I have found more and more when we give that creativity and that space for the institution to leverage that in a way that drives things forward, it gives you more levers to work with.
That's very well said. I mean, I think being a champion for unrestricted giving, which is the highest form of trust,
Yeah.
right? So, in different ways, whether we're in sales or we're fundraising or we are providing an education, we have to build relationships and experiences where people trust us. And I think when you get to that period of trust, people know that you have the ability to make the right decisions. And I think increasingly positioning your institutions and your ask around unrestricted giving so that you can be flexible with anything that comes down the path is, I think, incredibly important. So I mean, I just have to second and third everything that Ramon said. And a part of how that happens is not only the experience that students going to have today, so they want to give back 10, 15 years from now, but also our relationships with your relationships with private philanthropy and corporate philanthropy, increasing that trust and making the case of why the unrestricted dollars really, really matter because we're all going to have to pivot. I mean, no one is going to be unaffected. No higher education institution is going to be unaffected by what we see right now. What the beauty of and the opportunity of where we are in Baltimore is someone told me yesterday, I think they sit on the Board of Regents, if I have that correct. What she told me is that, and you all should correct my math, that Baltimore has the fifth largest student population per capita in the country. Does that ring true? Does that sound about right? All right, let's
I'm not
pretend that
sure.
it's true. We have a lot of college students living in Baltimore. They're attracted to Baltimore for various reasons. They either grew up here or they're coming here. And so what will it take for us to be able to protect that? We have to think about the role that unrestricted giving will make sure that those institutions allow people to walk in from whatever door. So whether they're the 18-year-old, the 21-year-old, the 25-year-old, the 30-year-old. I have a colleague that she got her education at the University of Baltimore. She's a young single mother. She wanted to put herself on the path. UB offered classes in the evening, so she was able to finish her degree, and now she has a great career. And we need to make sure that that kind of institution in our landscape continues to do really well. And I think unrestricted dollars will probably be one of the paths to ensure that.
One thing that we did that has had a bigger impact than I thought it might was we created the Bob Parsons Veterans Center. And we promote that heavily, both in student recruiting. And when I say we, I mean the school. I'm talking like we're team. We are. But anyhow, so that has worked really well. And anything that helps students, brings the students in, helps the university, and so that has happened. As a matter of fact, we just were recently notified that the school won an award by people who give such things as a top 10 military school. And couldn't be happier to see that work. And I'm sure I speak for Dr. Schmoke in like fashion.
And if I can add one thing that I didn't mention earlier, I know it's important to the other to Shanisha and Bob as well, is most of us went to school to yes, build skill, yes, build capability, yes, to make new friends, but ultimately it was also to get a job or to do something after you finish that education. So I think there's another opportunity for philanthropy around those pipelines, the talent pipelines. I know for on the corporate side, we oftentimes are on the front door with that relationship with the institution and then become that bridge to bring in people in as interns or thinking about getting our employees to go on campus to talk about careers and investment. So I think there's an opportunity to make sure that we are ensuring that when people graduate the institutions from those spaces, that there is somewhere that they can actually land.
I'm glad to see the expansive view that seems to align for all three of you, because we have an appropriate stress in the US for better quantitative skills, better math skills, starting from almost the beginning, and to expand the pathway for STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. However, there's a part that I think is under recognized, and to tap into what Ramon was discussing, and that's the non-STEM career student. We offer a master's in public administration. 60% of these people are going to be managers. They're not going to be high-powered financial analysts who need advanced statistics at the level of STEM preparation. So I think we still have pockets in which we're working to create resources to address under-recognized needs for the students that we're talking about to be successful in their careers when they don't have to have the traditional advanced statistics. They need to understand conceptually what's going on.
Yeah.
My 2 cents for you. So when you're looking at a proposal, a question from one of our participants, what are some of the things that make a potential investment for your foundation stand out for you? What makes you excited to provide that grant?
So I'm happy to go first. I'd say, one, if it's kind of anchored in some way to the priorities for that foundation, whether it's Tiro or Shanisha's organization or even Bob's, like you've got kind of that starting point. And I think from a practical perspective, we're looking for, is the request and strategy clear? Is it outcomes driven? Is it scalable? What does success look like in the future? And in some cases, we may be testing and learning. So let's unpack that. But I think the clarity of what you're looking to have happen and what the outcomes might be and what you're trying to solve. I've oftentimes had some really great conversations with people with really great ideas that are, really great thinking. And then when we talk about like, what does it look like in practice and what are you looking to solve? It's not as fully baked yet. So it's hard to be able to follow along as tightly. So I think as tight as they can be with the strategy, the issue they're looking to resolve, how it anchors to priorities of the foundation, and then how it might scale long term are things that I and we tend to kind of prioritize as we're assessing and talking to potential grantees. What would others
I
add?
couldn't agree more. I could agree more. And I think, Raymond, particularly for institutions of higher learning, that scalability, because the idea is that we provide the R&D money or the proof of concepts, and then we want to kind of see what the impact is from there. We also want to know kind of the role that our money plays in the overall program budget. So are we like the first money in? Are we leverage for you to raise more money? Are we kind of a part, like where are we like in the capital bundle? And what are we enabling and how? And like what difference does our funds make versus the other funds that you have available at your disposal?
Yeah, that's good.
So I'd like to extend what you were just saying, Shanesha. What do you think might be one misconception universities have about philanthropy, not just the University of Baltimore, but let's say not the University of Baltimore, but universities in general, when philanthropy is mentioned? And what might be one misconception that philanthropists have about universities that you are aware of because of your experience with working over time with them? Bob?
So I'm going to cheat. I have two misconceptions of philanthropy, and I think maybe just one that philanthropy may have of institutions of higher learning. So in terms of the two misconceptions, I think one, the opacity, which it's not unfair, but there's an opaqueness to philanthropy that people just are trying to figure out. What is T. Rowe Price? What does the money look like? What do they care about? How do I position myself? What is BCF? Same questions. Other foundations, same questions. So I think there's an opacity to philanthropy that lends itself to the second misconception that also might be somewhat fair, but that one is truly a misconception. Is that while we have incredible influence and for the most part flexibility, we actually don't have that much money. I think sometimes there are assumptions made that philanthropy can save the day in ways that actually may not be entirely true. And I think sometimes that's a misconception. So what you find is that across the spectrum of different kinds of foundations and givers, giving out money is actually really hard. It sounds easy and it sounds fun, and I know that sounds very rich coming from me. So I take the criticism and the cynicism that comes as a result of that remark. But it's really hard to figure out how to make the right decision given the large landscape of choices often available to us, our trying to discern the need and the impact, and the relatively limited dollars that we have at our disposal. So I would say those are kind of two misconceptions, if I can put those in that category. And I think the misconception that philanthropy often has about higher ed, and I actually come from higher ed. I was a professor once upon a time, and obviously I worked for colleges and universities, is that, you all look just like you have a lot of money, you don't need it. which means that your ability to make your case for support beyond the grateful alum is a lot harder. And I think sometimes as philanthropy, we should do a better job of just giving you all a little bit of grace because the model for higher education, while it looks like a big number, a lot of that money is unrestricted. It can only be used in certain ways. But that's a misconception. Like, for UB to come with a proposal and then for some $5 million operating nonprofit to come from a proposal, philanthropy may have a bias towards the $5 million nonprofit because they need the money more, and it would appear that the dollars would go further there. So I think there's a misconception about the funding model for higher ed and how you articulate need.
Thank
I would
you.
double down
Yeah,
on that.
I'd like to.
Go ahead, Bob.
Go ahead, Ramon.
No, I would double down on Shanaisha's comment because it is very real around just some of the bias that does live in our space around when you look at the cost of a semester and you read any article about the cost of higher education, you just assume that there's large endowments and that you all can move the money wherever you want it to go, which of course we know is not the case. So the more that we can kind of dismantle that piece of it, it is a helpful misconception. I think the second one that is a bit of a misconception around the university side is that you're slow and resistant to change. Sometimes we will think that there's a lot of complexity with the governance structures around higher education, so it can feel like things are moving slow, which is not always the case. So it's a good one to call and put the mirror up around. And I think on the other side of the coin, in terms of misconceptions on the philanthropy side, there's sometimes a thought that we are transactional and short term, when in most reality, many of us are relationship based, long term partners. Many do multi-year grants, and for most foundations in philanthropies, our hope is that we're going to be working with you for a while, even after the grant funding has ended. We're still hoping to follow this work and support in different ways.
Thank you.
And I'd like to triple down on that because like for example, I have through my blessings have become a billionaire, but billionaires are like basketball players. There's very tall ones and there's very little ones, and I happen to be a very little billionaire. And so example, so I have people who think that approach us to think that we have this endless pit of money, and we don't. We do have money, but one of the reasons we're able to do that, what we're able to do is we take and invest a significant part of what we have so that we can do it year after year after year of what we do.
Mhm.
So that's another note. So that's a really important misconception, and thanks for leading that off, Dr. Souls.
No, those are both great responses. And I think Ramon's point about the misconception that higher education can be slow moving, I think is also a very interesting one and worth unpacking at another time.
The next session.
That's right.
Okay, so I'll be handing that off to the next Rosenberg chair. So they already have the topic for next year. Now, looking ahead, what do you think is the biggest opportunity and/or perhaps the biggest challenge also for philanthropy to drive positive change in higher education?
I'm happy to start with that one. It's a good question. It's a deep one. When I think about the opportunity, I think, and we talked about it earlier, I think Shanaisha hit it off at the very start in her first response, was around thinking about ways to advance kind of equitable student outcomes at scale. We know that, as we said earlier, it's getting more expensive. Life is hard for everybody collectively. And I still continue to believe of the importance of higher education and access to it. So I do think there's an opportunity for us to target those investments towards access, persistence, career pathways, so the individuals are able to, yes, pursue their passion, but also pursue the passion in a way that will have a paid opportunity for them, whether it's entrepreneurship or a role in some other discipline. And I think about the challenge, I think there is a bit of a challenge around the mindset around moving from restricted to that more flexible, unrestricted that Shanaisha and I were talking about, because there's a lot going on in this landscape and there is a large focus, but I do think there is a need for universities and higher education to have the flexibility to use that money in some creative and innovative ways. So I think that is a mindset shift that'll be an important challenge for us in the months and years ahead.
Thank you, Ramon.
Yeah, I agree. I would say if there is a challenge as opportunity, I think again, and I say this as a former professor, right? And we thought that everyone in the administration was the dark side. So I'll just I'll say that as a standard disclaimer. We're it because of for all kinds of reasons, federal funding changes, AI disruption, there are going to be aspects of how higher education functions and looks that is actually going to have to change. So insofar as that there, and I think institutions that are positioning themselves for that reality are probably going to be in the better position to make cases for philanthropic dollars to innovate in a way that still holds true to the values and the importance of learning for learning's sake and learning to work, but
Mhm.
also is preparing to weather what's going to be some pretty significant disruption, both on the federal funding side and AI. And so I think that's going to be kind of working together with your funders and your would-be funders around what will that look like in the future. I think that it's both a challenge and an opportunity, knowing that that's not easy to do because it requires both of us to think differently and it requires us to essentially make a leap of faith that we're going to put a deposit in something that may not bear fruit for 5 to 10 years. But we're positioning these institutions in order to weather whatever comes their way.
Thank you.
If I could add one thing to what you were just sharing, Shanae, I think it's real. And we are in an age and a space of kind of miseducation, mistrust. According to the Edelman Trust Barometer, trust is at an all-time low in most institutions. And I think there is an opportunity on the philanthropy and the higher ed space to look at what is the right best research around where things are going. You know, to Shanae's comment around AI disruption, what does the job market look like? What are those skills that are really going to be future proof in terms of preparing the next generation to navigate this landscape? And I think our institutions are best positioned to provide that research and deliver that curriculum. So I think there is a partnership opportunity that becomes an opportunity for us to partner on as well.
Thank you, Ramon. Bob, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, one thing I will say about AI, it makes me feel like I have a much higher IQ.
Okay. Um, what I realized mostly about it is that it just seems like magic to me. So, uh, one of the things that impressed me when I was going to graduate school at the School of Public Health at Hopkins, and was becoming interested in health policy and management and also in international health, is how many of the faculty there had careers that weren't just like you, Dr. Sauls. They weren't just in academics. They had been in government. They had been in sometimes in industry or worked in foreign nations, Ministry of Health, and came to higher education. And they still had this kind of mix of theory and practice. And I think at the University of Baltimore, to the extent that I'm going through the Rolodex of my colleagues, most of our faculty are like that. They didn't just go K to 12 or K to 16 and then get a doctorate and then become a teacher. And I think that's one of the things that when we look at institutions and they're trying to reposition themselves, that if they have that and can build from that aspect of who their faculty are, that it might be more successful in terms of philanthropic initiatives, but also in preparing students to do what Bob did. What do you think? Is requiring somebody not just to have advanced degrees, but also real world experience, um, something that would make a proposal attractive?
I think it could. I think it would depend on, I think it would depend on, now I'm speaking for probably most of my individuals who we support. I'm not
Hmm.
talking necessarily about the discretionary grant making, but I think it could. I think depending on the major, the opportunity, the competency that you're building out, the function,
Hmm.
um, I think something like that could be very well received. Um, and also like positioning a school that's focused on preparing students to be successful in the current and future workforce. And in a lot of respects, UB might be, very storied. So sometimes when you're storied, it means it's harder to change, but you might be actually better positioned to support, particularly that student. Because one of the questions that we're asking ourselves, because there's a lot that we don't know about this future with AI, is like what part of the workforce is going to be the most vulnerable? And there's a lot that we don't know. But what I think people have figured out is that it's not people like me who are afraid of AI, don't really know what to use, don't know what to do with it. It's going to be people who are the most native to it and can direct it and understand enough how it works, and then has the power of discernment to direct it in ways that make sense for whatever it is that we're trying to deliver by way of service or goods. So there might be a real opportunity for UB to position itself in that way, on a case by case basis. I don't know.
I'll jump in here. It's always seemed to me that as an employer, um, I had hired lots of people, and I do like to see degrees and that sort of thing, but that's not where I place the most emphasis. I place the most emphasis on experience and somebody that has, I call it that light in their eyes that you could tell they want to make a difference. And I look back on my education, particularly my college education, but also some of my high school education. And the teachers that I had that could actually bring a subject to life. What a difference that made for me. I mean, I had a history teacher named his name was Mr. Roth. That was back when the teachers would smoke in class, and long time ago. And
I remember
uh,
Teachers Lounge.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, this is this. I still remember a lot of this stuff he said, and as opposed to somebody who has maybe, I mean, this is the opposite end of the spectrum, and most people are in the middle, but that are just talking out of a book. Let's say so. Yeah, I think that's incredibly important, and how you quantify that and how you do it, it's easier said than done.
Yeah, I think it's always been a little bit of the kind of the can you and will you. So can you is kind of going to higher education. Can you finish the curriculum? Can you learn? Can you innovate? Can you ideate? And then the will you is how do you apply that, whether it's to the workplace, your own business, and your own life in some way. And when both things work together, it's when there's magic. I think that's long been the power of internships, beginning in high school into college. It gives you that real world application to be able to say, how do I apply what I've learned to a business issue or whatever the issue is that you're working on. So that those both and I think will be even more important.
So before we go to the questions we have from the participants, I have one last question, and we can make it generic, doesn't have to be about Kurt, but you each have real depth of experience in philanthropy. If you could advise a university president briefly on how to engage philanthropy most effectively over the next 5 years, what would you say? And that's a question that probably requires a pause, but
I would say exactly the way Kurt does it.
okay.
Yeah, Kurt's on top of it already. And I would add, I think similar to what we were saying earlier around, being clear in what the need is, outcomes driven. I mean, I think across most sectors, there's always an access and an opportunity gap that we're trying to solve for. So I think as clear as you can be in that and as bold as you can be, and also how can we scale this? Because we're typically on the foundation side saying, what can we test and learn here that maybe 2 years from now we can then drop in 10 other universities to be able to create scale in other markets.
Okay. I'm going to open the Q&A and uh, so one, I don't know if this is a question so much as an observation. It is an observation. My final semester was funded by the Parsons Scholarship. It was so helpful as I prepared to raise funds for graduation, certification exams, and fees. Forever grateful. So Bob,
It's
a grateful beneficiary.
Well,
Shout out to
that
Bob.
makes it, some of it all worth the while, to hear that.
And I just want to add to that. I mean, how important, Bob, and congratulations and thank you, Bob, for doing that because it's so important in terms of, as someone that said earlier, that was a beneficiary of a scholarship, not just for you and your family. Like there was no parent loan, so the generational impact of being able to have access to a scholarship and the stress that it eliminates kind of across the family is huge. So I can't underscore that comment enough around its importance.
Another one, it's not a question, but it's observation, and thank you. The Veterans Center is the best in the state and is one of the top 10 in the country. We would not be able to do that without the Bob and Renee Parsons Foundation. And I have had students who are veterans and who they work part-time there. They benefit from it. So I can attest to the difference that things like that do make. This is more a question. From your vantage point, what are the non-traditional, quote, college disciplines, end quote, that schools should be delivering to have a stronger ROI for the students? We've been talking about that, particularly Ramon, and well, actually you all have, about what's that going to mean after graduation for the student so that they can have a robust path to at least a middle-class life. So what are some of those non-traditional college disciplines that we should be considering to improve that ROI?
I'll jump in here, and it's not non-traditional. Maybe with the way people are good at it, it's kind of non-traditional. But I say people that are able to write a paper, write the written word, or to write help wanted ad, or got command of the English language. That is such a rare commodity that I still rewrite a lot of stuff, and the Marine Corps didn't teach me any writing. The University of Baltimore did, but there you go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those are good ones. Those skills are important. I would add to what Bob shared around, I think, communication and influence. Like those are things when you think about what's kind of future proof, those are skills that you're going to need, especially as you're leading teams and leading strategy. You're leading your own company. So I'd say communication and influence, digital and AI fluency. I know there's another question down below that we'll come back to on that topic. Project management and project execution. So being able to take something from start to finish will be big. And the last one that I'd add is just systems thinking. Like there is such an interconnected nature of how things get done in any workplace, even your own business. So being able to have a systems thinking and enterprise mindset as a skill set, I think will be huge and I think future proof.
Yeah, I would agree, and I'm just glad that Bob said something about command of the English language. As one of my majors in school, not the only, but one of my majors was English literature and language, and I think one's command of the written word is incredibly important. And so I think that there is still an opportunity to make sure that we're shoring that up. And I think as we think about like future proof, there might be an opportunity for you all to think about how you design the last year. I won't say the fourth year anymore, but the last year of one's experience. And maybe it's bringing together different disciplines around a hands-on project. And that kind of becomes, so they're still rich in methodology, right? They kind of understand how to do something. They understand how to build something, draw something, write something, represent something mathematically, whatever it is, statistically. But as a part of their graduation requirement at UB is that they have to kind of take these different methodologies and show a competency. And then there's an opportunity, and the competency is a hands-on opportunity. And so that way it's less of a new major, but it's also like how we are using these methodologies in order to prepare them for life after UB. Or UBALT, excuse me, UBALT. I apologize. It took me an hour and 10 minutes to get the name right, UBALT.
Thank you. Let me go to questions from, I'll start at the bottom. Anonymous. Okay. I'm looking here. I recently completed my MPA at UBALT while working full-time in public service and managing family responsibilities. Although I was fortunate to have tuition remission as a UMS employee, I would not have been able to take enough credits at one time to qualify for financial aid. This seems to be a common challenge for working graduate students and potential graduate students. What role can philanthropy play in creating more flexible funding models for graduate education that reflect the realities of adult learners? That's quite a complex question, because I think it's not the answer to this, but the focus that Bob had mentioned earlier on doing the delta for Pell recipients is one way for one type of student. I think it probably is going to divide into tranches of who is the student and what is the source of the need or the type of the need.
And I do feel like we've done a better job on the higher ed side. So this is you all. Shout out to you all on the front lines there around finding more accessible ways for adult learners to go to school, whether it's the weekend classes, the evening programs, the accelerated executive MBAs. I think you've done a really good job in terms of being able to provide flexibility in when you attend school. And I think to the question, I think there's opportunity for us to partner to look at what does the funding side look like and where can philanthropy be most helpful. I think we still traditionally go down the path of, the 4 to 5 year window of time and what does that look like. So I think there's an opportunity for us to kind of reimagine a bit and create the future around how partnership can look in that space. I don't have the answer perfectly, but there's something that I think needs to be there.
This seems to be a durable issue. When I was in my 20s, I went to night school at Towson, and I took one course a semester because it was tuition remission from my employer, and that's what I could do. I took one course a semester. But ultimately, well, it's still a problem, is all I can say. We'll have to noodle on that and see what we can come up with, which is a really weak and irrelevant summation, but I apologize. One of the questions, how crucial or not do you, that's each of you, predict it will be for us as students to have a proficient understanding of AI as we enter the workforce in general and as philanthropists? So, Bob, you mentioned that you hire a lot of people.
Say to make it a point to use it in some way every week, if not every day. And to me, the way I taught myself how to program, and I have an introduction to data processing class as my credentials, and that was back when advanced programming or advanced computer was a deck of cards and a computer that ran Fortran. If you just learn a little bit every day, and you get to the point where you fall in love with it. And my father always used to say to me, he used to say, when you love something, it tells you all its secrets.
Mm.
That's true.
Mm.
And that's something that they should do. And then, you're on the outside looking in. There's a quote that Alfred C. Clark wrote years ago, and it's that any sufficiently advanced technology is basically indistinguishable from magic. And basically what the message there is if you're not involved in it in some way, you're missing the bus. And I mean, whether you're at a school or not, I mean, just use it on your phone or use it, but it's there. And I have always been surprised that I mean, if any medical question I have anymore, I use AI. I mean, doctors, I hate to say this, but I don't see too many of them. So there you go.
And I echo what Bob said. I think I'd be a little stronger around it. I think it's incredibly crucial to have at least a comfort with AI. It is here. It is in every part of our lives in terms of in the workforce and running a business, and it's an efficiency play. And I talk quite often to student groups and even kind of employees inside T. Rowe Price, and you always have multiple camps of you have the excited folks that it's the best thing since sliced bread, and you got the other folks that are like, I'm scared for my job and my pieces and what my job exists, 2 years from now. And the answer is your job will likely, will exist. I heard a quote recently, and the quote was, you shouldn't be worried about AI taking your job, but you should be worried about the person that knows AI taking your job. So I think being, if you're just getting started, I think to Bob's point, kind of use it in ways that are interesting to you. Use it to plan you a 1 day trip, for, enjoying Baltimore. Ask it questions that you care about. If I have 12 hours in Baltimore on Saturday, what should I do? And see what it comes back with. So I think that's kind of start in kind of a comfortable space, but you absolutely don't want to miss kind of the skill that people are building right now around having literacy around AI.
Yep.
As a footnote to that, the course I'm finishing up for this current semester is on analytic tools, so it's spreadsheet based and doing modeling. And we teach in the project how to use AI, but how to appropriately cite how you used it with the prompt. What was the output? How did you take that output, and what does it relate to in the model that you developed? So in that way, we both increase the skills in the compressed time of a term without having to go out and get data, but also understand the accountability and the transparency required. This is how I used it. So we're hoping that incrementally we'll be getting to the stage that you're talking about. Another question from one of our students. I want to build on what you're saying about access. There's financial access, removing tuition barriers, but I think there's also narrative access. The question a first-generation student asks is this for me? Do people like me succeed here? Right now, that answer lives in scattered stories. You all have such powerful stories, and there are other powerful alumni stories, especially from students who overcame barriers. How do you use them so that prospective students could actually see themselves in the institution's future? Has anyone thought about storytelling infrastructure as a philanthropic strategy?
I start with yes. I know we use kind of storytelling as a way to kind of motivate people toward action, to engaging in some way, because people love, I think to your comment, Nicole, people love personal stories and seeing themselves in something. So I think we've used it in other contexts. And I would say separately, I've seen even, you bought in your campaigns are showcasing students and alumni. And when you can see a picture of someone that talks about their career or their career path, it makes it easier for a student to say, this person did it, so can I? So I want to kind of anchor that is such an important comment around the importance of people being able to see themselves. And I think there's more that we can do from a storytelling perspective to really put a human focused kind of approach to possibilities.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would just say, just on a like a personal note to the person who asked that question and anyone who says, can I do this? Is this for me? Do not consider yourself an anomaly. You're the chance. You have a chance. Someone has given you a chance. You have every right to be here as anyone else. There are resources at your disposal. Sometimes it's harder. Everyone's path is a little bit different, but just don't think of yourself as an anomaly. I think you've asked a bigger question about how philanthropy can make sure that first generation students can be successful. I think Raymond gave a great answer. And I won't add to that, but I would just say that, like, while it can be difficult, resist creating your own narrative of victimhood and that you can't. I can assure you that where I sit today, I have a list of what I can't do that goes all the way to the substrate, and that doesn't matter. So, you just figure out how to do it anyway. So you have a chance. You're not an anomaly. So.
Yeah, I think you have a great chance, and the only person that determines how great that chance is you. And I say that just metaphorically, but it's just the person that's looking in, they can determine how much of the party they want to participate in, because nothing is as difficult as it seems. Nothing's as good as it seems. And so you just got to get in and do things, and so you can start actually having real world experience and driving home that meaning to you, and knowing that it's true.
Right. And can I just say something else that's really important to that point? Like, and it's come up earlier. I think the average age of a college student in the United States is like 20 something or 30 something. It's not the 18 or 19-year-old. And if you lined up 10 people who went to college, and let's assume they all graduated, you'll have some people who finished in 4 years, you'll have more, but you'll have more people who took a lot longer than that. But at the end, they found their path. So again, you have a chance, not an anomaly. Um, and you can make your path and it's okay. And if your path takes a little bit longer, that's fine. And the great thing about an institution like UB, which is why I think we're all here today in support of this lecture series, is that we actually think that this is a university that provides chances for people no matter how you enter. So that's all I would say. I know it's a little bit more personal, but it's an important lesson to remember.
Yeah. And I just add one final piece. I think this is perfect. And I would just say, to the person that asked the question, is that sometimes you will be the first so that someone can see you in their path because they need to see that as well. So sometimes you still go. If there's no one that you can see in the story, there's nobody on the billboard that looks like you just yet, you become that billboard. So when that person 5 years behind you or 3 years behind you is asking the same question, they see you, Nicole. So do it.
Yeah, and all you really have, it seems like we're like butter, we're on a roll here. But it seems like you just have to think about it every day. Think of yourself, picture yourself doing it, picture yourself part of it. And there's another saying that I quote all the time: "As you think, so shall you be."
Yeah.
I think I can, well, I can't quote the page, but I can pull from Bob's book, Fire in the Hole, where he makes the point where he was in a tough situation, but he summarized it with one sentence at the end of a chapter saying, it's when you think that you've been defeated that you still persist. That's when you find out how much you can really do.
There you go. And, I tell my people that work for me, I said, anybody can handle the good times.
Mhm.
It's the tough times where your measures taken. And so, that's what I tell them too. So that's your opportunity. Go get it. And, quite often that translates into success. And I wanted, since you brought up the book, this past week, this week, as a matter of fact, is a banner week for us in the book because we have crossed the point of 100,000 copies sold.
Wow.
Oh,
Yeah. So I didn't think I'd ever write a book, much less sell that many copies. So I used to think about it.
Thanks for sharing that, Bob.
No.
Uh, I'm going to, unless you have some concluding comments to your colleagues or about what we're discussing today, I'll turn it over to Kurt to do a wrap up. A reminder to those who are participants, everyone who registered will receive a copy of the link to the recording. That's particularly helpful to those who could not attend live for other competing activities on their calendar. So any wrap up points that you would like to make to your colleagues or to the audience?
Yeah, I'd like to thank both of my colleagues for being here. It's the first time I've ever been to anything other than a long, long time ago, where it's been somebody that is with another foundation, and I found it enlightening and good. And however much I respected you going into this, I respect you more now.
Wonderful.
ditto.
I mean, it's hard to find new things to say. I think certainly President Schmoke, Alan, for all that you do, and then those that are on that spent, an hour or so listening to us and asking us thoughtful questions. Thanks for doing your work on the front lines as well.
Thank you.
And for those of you whose question has not been addressed, I will endeavor to the extent that it's possible to get an answer. Kurt, this is up to you to wrap up, friend.
Well, I just want to thank everyone for participating. It's been really enlightening and challenging, I'm sure, to everyone. I have to particularly thank Bob, because he mentioned his contributions to the Marines, but he's also been a great contributor to our veterans programs, both at the law school and the undergraduate side. And Shanesha, thank you too for coming to the neighborhood and uplifting us. We're quite an environment now with Micah close by, and then the foundation. It's just wonderful. And Ramon, all that T. Rowe Price is doing is just outstanding, not only for the community, but Baltimore in general. Outstanding organization, great employer, and a real leader in civic engagement and education. So I just thank you. And Alan, this is your last go round on the webinar. You've been an outstanding professor and doing wonderful things for the university. And of course, you've been acknowledged not only nationally, but internationally. And so we're very proud of you and pleased that you could conduct this webinar today. So thank everyone for joining us today. And we hope that you've gained some information. I know it's challenging for all of us now. Of course, I've learned how to approach foundations better now, and that I think will benefit the university in the future. So take care.
Thank you, Kurt. And I would say it's been a quite different path, not Bob's, but this has been quite a journey for a kid from Highlandtown. So thank you, Kurt.
All right, bye-bye. Thank you all so much.